about Prodigal today. You guys voted on Prodigal for this month's Behind the Bedlam. So, like the rest of them, I will be digging into the lyrics, the themes, some of the music, just dependent on the song. And a lot of today's will be about lyrics. We're in shelter at home right now here in Minnesota, so I will be video chatting Sophie, because she also had a huge part in writing the lyrics to this song. So I want to make sure she gets in here and gets to talk a little bit about her writing process as well today, which is a little different than what we've done. So I'm really excited about it. I know it's the last day, it's the last day of March I'm getting this out, but Prodigal is very personal, and I think I've been putting it off a little bit. But let's dig in. It should be a fun one. So I remember I started writing Prodigal in the spring of 2015, right before we started the band. And I remember sitting when I first moved to Minneapolis, sitting on the living room floor of my apartment, and all my roommates and friends were hanging out, and I remember just not being able to get this out of my head and playing it, sitting there on the floor. And that was kind of the first day I started writing Prodigal. And then a few nights later, I remember I couldn't sleep, so I went out and I came up with... I sat out in the living room again in the dark and wrote my really angsty verse, going to bed in all the old places chorus there. And so I wrote those two different sections over 2 days. And then once Sophia and I started the band, actually she ended up writing, I didn't have any words for the verses, so she wrote all of those and she sings them as well when we do it live or on the record. This is one we actually get a lot of requests for, but we don't play too often. So before we get to the verse, what I want to talk about is the chorus and a little bit about what this song is and what it means to me and what it means to Sophie. And you know, Prodigal is a reference to the story of the prodigal son coming home, and when I was writing this chorus, a lot of what it was about what it looks like when you have an incredibly unhealthy habit or thinking pattern or an addiction, and how that kind of manifests itself, like when you're trying to get away from those things and you just keep returning to it. And how every time you think you're getting better, you fall back into your same patterns. And so that's a lot of what, you know, when I started writing this was, and how some of those unhealthy habits I had it coming home from. Mostly those things are having to do with unhealthy thought patterns and the way I think about myself, and how that creates just really negative habits for myself. And so, you know, the words are, going to bed in all the old places, kind of returning to those things. Been dreaming of demons with familiar faces. And then, you know, just about how it's not new, it's just something that I just can't seem, you know, they're familiar to me, they're familiar demons. And, you know, a lot of times in these situations we just think, like, why am I like this? And wishing you can get away from that. And I think that's pretty universal. So I think this course is universal, whether we all struggle with something, we all return to things. The next part goes, they look just like loved ones, but with tighter embraces. They say, we've seen your heart, it's calloused, it's heinous. And that's just about how when you're in those situations and unhealthy patterns, often you know, when you're unhealthy, you can't even distinguish anymore the difference between what is good and bad for you anymore. You know, they look like loved ones, they look like comfort. But when you're unhealthy, sometimes you can't tell the difference between, am I getting better, or am I just doing the cycle again? They said, we've seen your heart is callous, is heinous. That voice in your head, and I'm assuming that everybody has that voice in their head that's just, you know, when you're trying to get away from something, that just says, you've already failed, so why try? And a lot of that is, you know, this song is about that. This is the angstiest of the Good Morning Bedlam tunes, as we like to call it. We always joke that it's by far the angstiest. We have got a lot of dark themes and a lot of dark stuff in our songs, but we usually like to put them to happy tunes to disguise them. Alright, so I want to give Sophia a call and kind of ask her about her thoughts on the lyrics and that good stuff right there. And I think it's going to be a really fun time. Let's give her a shout. All right, we're giving Sophie a call. We're going to let's see what she has to say. What's going on?
Hey!
I can't see you.
I can't see either.
Oh, there you are. Alrighty, so we're talking about Prodigal today, and as I was saying, Soph wrote a bunch of the words for Prodigal. We're going to kind of go through them and see what she has to say, which I think it'll be fun. This is pretty different. We've never done anything like this. How's quarantine going for you, Soph?
Oh, it's going pretty good. It's nice to be quarantined out here.
Ooh. So, I just want to get into the first verse of Prodigal here and see what you have to say about it and tell us a little bit about what this first verse is about.
All right. I'm nervous. This is nerve-wracking. But, so this one, so I remember this was one of our very first times writing together. The first verse, wrapped up in blankets, hiding from my own tears, believing through blindness I'll escape those dear fears. That was a lot about, at the time, I had been kind of struggling with a lot of anxiety and depression and had been isolating myself a lot and kind of had this strong desire to avoid people, and I didn't know how to overcome it at the time. Had trying to hide, believing through blindness I'll escape those dear fears was a lot of like, I just desperately wanted to avoid the feelings that I was struggling with at the time. Then the next one, if only my hunger were for righteousness sweet, and if only my mind didn't stay my own feet. So the word hunger there kind of has significance because before this I had struggled with anorexia, and then during this time I had kind of like gotten healthy physically and had like regained weight that I needed to regain, and I was sort of, sounds weird, but we're learning how to eat normally. And I just remember like going through days where I just didn't want to eat, and then days where I would eat way too much and feeling like a lot of shame and a lot of difficulty around that. And the verse, only my hunger were for righteousness sweet, just kind of during that time feeling ashamed and wishing like, man, why is this my biggest struggle? Like just eating, that's so easy for a lot of people. And why can't I desire something better or worry about something better? So that was kind of that line, and if only my mind didn't stay my own feet, was kind of that same thing, that shame and anxiety that was preventing me from actually overcoming the things that I needed to overcome to concern myself with quote-unquote better things. And I think that's the end of the first verse.
And thank you so much for sharing. And then I talked a little bit about the chorus before I gave you a call, and just about how that's what it is. It's really what the chorus is saying is, why do I keep returning to these things, and why can't I just be different? And about how just so much of it is just like, I think you would agree based on what you just said, is like, it's more about the voices in our own heads oftentimes than the actual struggle. And how that creates a loop in our minds. And I think that's, when we were putting it together, that's what we were really talking about and thinking about. Do you want to move on to the second verse?
Let's do it.
Awesome.
Right.
I'm so glad you're doing this. I'm so glad you're on here.
I am too. Thanks for having me on here. How long were you thinking you could hide? So it's just, I had this just want, and I think maybe people who have felt anxiety have felt this before, of just like, I wanted to put off the next step towards growing or becoming healthier or facing my fears. And I just really, really wanted to put it off indefinitely. And it's it's also kind of referring to back to the prodigal story, like how long can you hide from the father? Because you're not really hiding. But and then the fig tree part was referencing a Bible verse, which I think has to do with something about shame. But I was trying to think back, and I don't really remember it now. But shame birthed by pride, I remember really clearly at the time that I was kind of learning or thinking about how a lot of shame comes from a place of pride, which seems kind of counterintuitive. But I think one way shame happens is when you're struggling with something and something inside you says, well, I'm better than this. Other people can struggle with this, but I shouldn't be. Or like, it's this voice that's like saying, being dishonest about what you're struggling with rather than just saying like, you are struggling and you're dependent. You need help. And you need to oftentimes, to me, turn to God and be dependent on Him, as opposed to acting like you can just handle everything on your own, or turn to friends, or turn to loved ones.
I've always thought of the fig tree. It's like when you're in a state like this that we're writing about. It's like it's not the way to nourish something,
Yeah.
And when we're in cycles like this, it's that, and so that's how I've kind of thought about it. And we talk a lot, and we've talked about it on here before, where it's like songs are up for interpretation. And so Sophie has her own interpretation of what she was writing about, and I have an interpretation somewhat of what the song means to you, and you'll have your own. So if it does mean something to you, that's totally fine, because there's no right or wrong answers for art like this. But for me, I've always thought of that as like, the way we shame ourselves it doesn't nourish growth for us and health, and that's what I've always connected with it in my own life. So, and then we go into that second chorus, and that's kind of fun just thematically. That's actually the first part of the song where Sophie and I's voices actually come together, and so we kind of come together within that song. And I think that really what it does is it moves it into like two separate struggles into more of a universal feel, which I think is really cool there. And then we hop down into that bridge. I'm try not to block you here. Can you hear? Hush, child, can you hear? And we get down into that, and I don't know if you've given this any thought, or I was trying to kind of give it some thought of what that verse was about when we were writing it and that kind of thing, but I was going to see if you have any thoughts on it first.
Yeah, well, at the time there was something, it seemed really natural, that part, because I remember when we were trying to write this, it was, Isaac's probably talked about this, it was one of the first times we ever wrote together, and I remember having to like clear my head just so that there wasn't that critic saying like, don't try that, that's dumb. So I remember this line coming by really naturally, and it's like referencing that prayer that a lot of kids pray of the before you go to bed, something soul to keep, all that stuff. But hush now, my child, go off to sleep. When will you find that you're taken care of? That's all. Just rest. Allow yourself to rest and know that, to me, that means know that you're in my hands, know that you're in God's hands. When will you realize that you're already taken care of? So that's what that little bit means to me.
Yeah, and I think what I was thinking was very similar. It's like, I just remember it being very natural. It's like, oh, this is the direction it needs to move. And I think that since trying to think back on it, I've kind of assigned, what I think it probably means, but I don't remember really in the moment. Kind of what I was thinking, thinking back on it is often I find myself, like when I find myself in situations like this, it's that I think that I'm either strong enough or clever enough to kind of work my way out of the situation or fight my way out of the situation or just to get out of it. And how oftentimes for things like this, that I just can't. I just have to be silent, and I have to listen to the voices of my friends or my family, my loved ones, and sometimes you just gotta shut up and listen and be present in what's going on to identify the root of an issue. In my own life, it's just, I can't, if it's my mind that is being destructive, I can't use my mind to save myself. And so sometimes I just gotta shut up. And, I can't think my way out of unhealthy thinking patterns. There has to be something outside of that, too. And what we do here with the music, I love that, it's a really, it's, the word hush is, such a contrast to how aggressive this part of the song is. It's an aggressive hush. And just the chains, they're such a cool musical thing, but also thematically this indicator of being trapped, chains. And it also, it has this very anthem-y thing to it, which is, in all of these voices, we recorded this, all of those gang vocals I recorded in this big theater room with all of these people, and just reminding everybody that addiction or shame or these really unhealthy cycles that we get ourselves into mentally are just, they are universal. And sometimes it helps to remember that we're not the only ones struggling with something. And then we kind of come out of that bridge and we go into the third verse. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I kind of, like what Isaac was saying before, how all songs are really the point of songs and poetry is that they're open to interpretation, both they can be different from what the writer meant or was thinking at the time, and different to the writer at different times throughout their life, and that's definitely something that's throughout my life. Since we've been playing these songs for a while, they always take on different meanings. But at the time, and still now, your blood in your body, fill me with guilt and fill me with purity, there my salvation is built. So that, I'm Catholic, and that to me was really about a struggle that I was having with the sacrament of communion at the time, where whenever I would receive that sacrament, I would feel a lot of guilt, because to me that is receiving the actual body and blood of Christ or of Jesus. And I would think of that sacrifice and that act of perfect love, and I would think that, like, I'm so flawed, and I'm so incapable, and I'm so weak, and impure. I'm so impure. I don't deserve to receive this. I don't deserve to receive this love, and that's what I would think, which is again your mind and whatever voices or demons, however you believe in that, that's those things lying to you in that way, and basically keeping you away from the thing that is actually going to nourish you. So that's kind of almost like a trick that my mind was playing on me and saying, like, oh, you're not worthy of this, when really the point of it isn't to be worthy, it's to receive love and to receive healing and care. So that's something that I later realized, is that the sacrifice, it's not to make you feel guilty about your struggles, but to aid me in my struggles and in overcoming my struggles. It's a pure gift. It's something, and it's something that to me, God and Jesus, they long for me to receive it. They long for their children to receive it. Like any father who loves his child wants his child to receive his love, and be healed by it, regardless of what they think of themselves or what they've done. So your blood in your body, fill me with guilt and fill me with purity, there my salvation is built. And that's just referencing that lie of, like, you should feel guilty about this, and you don't deserve this, when really you've been given this gift, and it's meant to nourish and heal you, and it's an act of actual healthy love. Each sin that I've hidden strikes a spear in your side. So that again is in reference to kind of like a meditation or thinking about the crucifixion of Jesus, and how and again, this is all just personal to me, and if you interpret it in a different way, please continue to do so. Talking about how whenever we hide our darkness or hide our quote-unquote failures from God or from Jesus, it pains him, and it continues to pain him, and that's, why he was crucified. He died, he gave himself for the love of us, because he loves us. And like a father or a mother who wants their child to talk to them about things that they're struggling with, when we hide our darkness from him, or choose our will instead of his, it pains him. Like any good parent would be pained if their child felt like they couldn't share things with them. In the past year, someone wise said to me, like, what's the one thing that God doesn't have? And the one thing that he doesn't have is your darkness. And that's kind of like what I need to share with him and give to him, and what he longs for, what he wants us to share with him. But I cannot find your saving face, for your blood is in my eyes. It's kind of gruesome. And that again was just, I was picturing there's an image that a saint painted of Jesus, where he's standing and there's a ray of blood and a ray of water coming out of his chest. And if you want to see it, you can look it up. If you look up Jesus, I trust in you image, you'll find that image. And that's the picture that came to my head at that time of the Bible verse, the soldier pierces his side, and blood and water falls from his side and covers this soldier who's checking to see if he's dead. That is Jesus is giving his body and blood to save humanity. And that was just the image that I was thinking of at that time, which it sounds really gruesome, but to me it's actually a really beautiful, love-filled thing, I guess. Man, these verses are long. Okay, so return now, my child, all is not lost. A table is waiting, but then comes the cross. So I like this verse for multiple reasons. There's the one just to me fun thing where lyrically the story of the prodigal son and to me the story of Christ are crossing over. So this can either be interpreted as like the prodigal son returning home and having that bounty waiting for him. A table is waiting, and having that feast waiting for him. And it can also be read or interpreted as the Last Supper. So return now, my child, all is not lost. A table is waiting, but then comes the cross. So Christ is having his Last Supper with his disciples and then going to be crucified. And then you're suffering as much. And this was more back to just, again, kind of meditating on the crucifixion. But the sun, she shines bright, but when she finally goes to rest, you'll be at my right side. And that's Jesus' suffering. To me, the voice was God's voice talking to his son and saying, you're going to suffer, but then you'll go to rest and you'll come to my right side and you'll be on my right side. And kind of like Christ's life was a sort of blueprint for how we can live our own. I think that voice is applicable to us as well, and applicable to the way that God calls to us and says, you're going to suffer, and your walk will be long, and your life will probably be difficult, but just trust me, and when you come home, you'll be home with me. That promise is alive both in Jesus' suffering and in our suffering. And at the time, I think I been reading The Great Divorce, which I've read a few times throughout my life, and it's always super impactful. And I thought that there's a chapter, if anyone here has read it, where someone's struggling with a sin, and an angel in the story wants to take it away from him. And finally the guy allows him to. And he's angry in the midst of it because he's like, ow, this is hurting. And the angel had said before, like, it won't kill you. So the angel, or the whatever this like bright figure is, says, like, I said that it wouldn't kill you, but I didn't say it wouldn't hurt. And I think that's true of a lot of, like, letting go of shame, or letting go of something that we're suffering with, or letting go of sin, is that it will hurt, but it will also make you stronger. And whatever you're suffering with in that chapter, his sin, which was represented by this like little lizard on his shoulder, became a stallion that carried him into the mountains of heaven.
Thanks so much for sharing. It's good to hear another voice and another perspective on these videos, so I really appreciate it. It's good to hear from you. You've got a very articulate way about you, which is nice.
Thank you so much.
Don't just bumble around in the dark like me on these videos. We're adding some class to these. Then we go back into the chorus, and I know Sophie's been talking a little bit about what she believes on this video and that kind of stuff. One thing that I really enjoy about this song, so I think probably most of you know this, and I've talked a little bit about this in maybe some other videos, but I grew up in a Christian household, and I have a Christian background, and as Sophie knows, I'm a recovering evangelical, and I like to call myself a confused individual at this point. I'm spiritual, but I'm not quite sure what I believe at this point in my life. But one thing that I really love about this song is that Sophia and I, as people who believe some different things in our lives and that kind of thing, like, we can come together and we can really be unified over a lot of these aspects, because we do believe in a lot of this, we agree on so many of the same principles of love and health and supporting each other and doing that kind of stuff, as she believes one thing and I wander around not sure what to believe in my life. And so it's really enjoyable for me to sing songs like this where I get to connect with my bandmates over these things, and it's we don't agree on everything, but we are able to come together and say, but we see these patterns in history and in our own lives of these cyclical natures that we can support each other through, and we can connect over, and we can agree on coming out of them takes something outside of ourselves, That's just, it's really cool that I get to do that with Soph in this song, and I really appreciate being able to do that. Sophia was talking about in The Great Divorce how, I said it wouldn't kill you, I didn't say it wouldn't hurt, and I think that going into the outro, that really strikes a chord with me in getting in health. And I think the reason that sometimes these cyclical patterns are so hard to break, and the reason that they're so painful to come out of, is really because we've come to identify with ourselves with them, and that's why it's so painful. It's not that because and so that's kind of what the outro is going into. That first line is the 'cause that sky may be tempting, but we are your roots. And that sky may be tempting, but we are your roots. And if you sever us and bleed out, then what will that prove? I think that's oftentimes the way our mind works, is the reason we don't even want to try to step away, or that we can't step away, is because we have identified those parts of our personality with us, and we've said, this is me, this is the way that I am. And so if I try to step out of it, it's so painful that I'm just going to fail and I'm going to fall back into it. So it's easier to stay here where I've identified myself, because in the moment that's an easier thing to do. than to move towards health, which is incredibly painful, especially the more we've identified ourselves with our addictions or our struggles or our anxiety or our depression. And that's why often I do believe that, like, your mind can't save the problem of your mind. And that's kind of what this is about. It's like, well, you can reach for the sky, but you'll always come back to failure. That's what the voice in my head says. And that's what, this voice in this part of the song, that's the voice in my head. Those are my demons that I'm struggling with. And Sophie and I are struggling with, and we get to trade this off. We are your roots, and if you sever us and bleed out, what will that prove? If you cut ties with your demons that you've identified with, your addictions that you've identified with, then who are you? And I think, that's why it's so painful. It's because we believe that's who we are. And so it's like the tearing away of of what we believe is ourself. You can cry out and scream out and bleed out and pray, but what if God don't come down? What if you can't be saved? For me, and I want Sophie to kind of speak on this as well if she'd like, but what that means is that is the thought pattern that is in my head when I'm struggling, is what if I leap, if I struggle and I leap away and I take that leap only to fail, then that's going to be even more excruciating. I tell myself, then if I just stay with the pain that I'm familiar with. Because at least it's familiar, at least I know it. And so it's better not to leap, because what if I do it? What if I work as hard as I can, I struggle as much as I can, but at the end of the day, I believe I'm going to come back. Then I might as well stay with what I'm familiar with and what I've identified with in my life. I don't know. Do you have anything to speak on that, Soph?
I mean, that was beautifully said. That was beautiful.
That's why I bring you on here, so you could say that. So it kind of goes then into, I stuck out my neck.
Oh, that's right.
To see if they'd follow through, and that's like the voice in my head. Will it follow through with its threats if I really go for it and I try to escape? They'd follow through, and when I do so, and then it says, I heard a small voice that was wrapped up in truth. And so it's like getting out of that, like hearing the voice of hope, like saying and being open, I'm going for it. And in my life at the time when we were writing this, I mean, that was Sophie's voice, that was my wife Tori's voice, that was my family, my friends, my loved ones. It's like I put it out there and I said, I need help, I need to change, like I need to move forward and not identify with these things, and they did. They came alongside. Wrapped up in truth. And then, if your heart is still beating, so Soph's going to talk about the line, if your heart is still beating, then you are my son. I've prepared a feast while you've been on the run.
And that definitely wraps it up to, I think all of these metaphors of the prodigal son, of talking about Christ's crucifixion, of talking about our own struggles, can all be wrapped up in this line of, to me, God speaking to his children and saying, if your heart is still beating, which to me is somewhat like, it can be interpreted as if you're still alive, or if your soul is still existent. If the heart of you is still existent, so for as long as you exist, you are my son. And I prepared a feast while you've been on the run. And that to me was a very maternal line, a very much like, when you come home, dinner's ready. And we want you to come home. So when I sing this line, I always think of Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus, kind of relaying God's message of, you are his children, which is kind of her MO. So in my head, I've continuously heard that, as regardless of where I was in my journey or where I was in life, that line always makes me think of Mary saying, if your heart is still beating, you are his son, you are my son, and I've prepared this feast while you've been on the run. And it doesn't matter where you've been, but you're welcome home, you're welcome at this table.
Yeah, and just how I experienced that in my own life was, just coming back to my family and just saying, like, I'm and finding that in my friends, in my family, and in, writing the song when my relationship with Tori was new, and having these people just say, like, you're alive, so we love you unconditionally, and you're welcome, and you belong here, was just something when I had moved to Minneapolis before I started writing this song, that I just didn't feel anywhere that I belonged. Your insults forgotten, they're dead and they're gone, so you're free to come home, back to where you belong. Of like, that is what my tribe has shown me, my people, my family, my friends, my band, is just, I am a screw up, but they just love me unconditionally. They just let me come back. And that's what this song is about, and that's actually what the album Prodigal is about. That's what we want people to know at Good Morning Bedlam shows, is that we don't really care what you believe or who you think you are or what you think you deserve. Like, you belong. You have a home. And so I think this song was a path of us realizing, like, we want people to feel a home in Good Morning Bedlam, of like, you don't have to be anything. You don't have to be good. You don't have to be happy. You don't have to have it together. Like, you belong, because we definitely don't have anything together in this band. Like, you belong here. You're loved. That's something we all struggle with, and we just want people to know. We want people to know that you belong here. So that's kind of what Prodigal's about. That's the themes of Prodigal. Our angstiest song there kind of ends on a hopeful note, and just on a non-thematic note, this song was so fun to put together. The banjo and the bass really, we started playing it as an acoustic duo, and then adding the banjo and the bass, and on the record the banjo's highly aggressive, it's got distortion on it. And this has just been one of the most fun songs for Good Morning Bedlam to put together ever. And so we also all really like dark stuff, so it was fun for us to kind of stretch our angst and try something that was not just lyrically a bit darker, but also something that was musically a bit darker. So that was really fun for us. Awesome. Well, if you have any questions for me or for Soph, comment them below, please. If there's anything you wanted to know that we forgot, I'm sure there is. We mostly talked about lyrics because there are a lot of lyrics in this song. It is a long, long song. And so if there's anything you want to know about any of it, please give us a comment, and we'll get back to you ASAP. But thank you so much. So, thanks so much for being on here and chatting.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. All right, see you, everyone.
Bye.